Welcome to Radio US. The United States has recently witnessed a significant transformation in its federal workforce, one that has left a profound mark on both government operations and the lives of the affected employees. Under the leadership of President Donald Trump, a major restructuring effort has been underway, leading to the dismissal of nearly 10,000 federal employees. This action is part of a broader initiative to streamline the federal government, reduce its size, and minimize spending. While the Trump administration presents these layoffs as a necessary step towards achieving a more efficient government, the move has raised concerns regarding the long-term effects on the delivery of public services and the ability of agencies to carry out essential functions. The cuts were not limited to one specific agency or sector. Rather, they were implemented across various departments, including the Department of the Interior, Department of Energy, and Department of Agriculture. In particular, those employees on probation during their first year of service were targeted, marking a strategic focus on reducing the ranks of federal workers who have not yet achieved permanent status. Additionally, 75,000 workers had already accepted voluntary buyouts, a measure introduced by the administration to offer employees a severance package in exchange for their exit from federal service. This is roughly 3% of the total 2.3 million employees that make up the U.S. federal workforce. However, while the buyouts were seen as a voluntary exit strategy, the layoffs presented a more direct and controversial approach to downsizing the government. The administration's rationale for such a large-scale reduction in the federal workforce is twofold. First, there is a desire to streamline government operations, cutting through what many see as inefficiencies and redundant layers within federal agencies. Second, the Trump administration has long argued that the U.S. government is burdened by its high level of debt and ongoing deficits. The $36 trillion national debt, alongside a $1.8 trillion budget deficit from the previous year, has been a driving factor behind the push to reduce federal spending. The Trump administration views this restructuring effort as an essential part of addressing these financial challenges and ultimately ensuring the sustainability of the U.S. government. This restructuring process has been heavily criticized by many, especially those in the Democratic Party, who argue that the layoffs and the forced reductions in government spending threaten the quality of public services. The Trump administration's actions, they contend, undermine critical functions such as disaster relief, environmental protection, and social services. Several government programs and agencies that rely heavily on public funding, such as the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, have already faced funding freezes or even temporary shutdowns. The approach has led to pushback from a variety of interest groups who argue that the cuts disproportionately affect low-income communities, veterans, and other vulnerable populations that depend on federal programs for essential services. One of the most significant aspects of this move has been the impact on public lands and natural resources. In the closing days of the Obama administration, former President Obama imposed a moratorium on federal land leases, specifically in offshore areas. This action restricted the U.S. government's ability to lease land for energy exploration and extraction. The Trump administration, however, has moved aggressively to reverse this ban, placing millions of acres of public land back into production. This includes the restoration of access to 625 million acres of offshore land, which had been removed from consideration for energy development. By doing so, The Trump administration has sought to unlock the full potential of U.S. energy resources, arguing that these resources should be utilized to fuel the nation's economic growth and reduce dependence on foreign energy sources. The debate over the future of U.S. energy policy and the fate of these public lands has taken center stage in recent Trump news conferences. In one such instance, President Trump discussed the need to ensure energy dominance and the importance of using America's vast natural resources to power the country's future. He emphasized that the U.S. has more energy reserves than any other country, including oil, gas, coal, and renewable resources, and that the nation must capitalize on this advantage to assert its dominance in the global energy market. Trump's aggressive push to open up federal lands for oil and gas exploration has been met with strong resistance from environmental groups and some state governments, who argue that these actions will have long-term negative consequences for the environment and public health. In response, Trump framed the energy policy changes as a way to enhance national security by reducing reliance on foreign energy imports and ensuring that the U.S. has the energy it needs to compete in the global economy. As part of the broader push to revitalize the U.S. energy sector, the Trump administration has also focused on increasing the production and export of liquefied natural gas, LNG. The recent approval of the Commonwealth LNG project in Louisiana, for example, is expected to bring substantial job creation to the region and bolster the country's ability to export natural gas to international markets. In addition to creating jobs, this move aligns with Trump's larger strategy of bolstering America's energy production while also positioning the country as a global leader in energy exports. This strategy is particularly important as nations like Japan and India have expressed interest in securing U.S. natural gas to meet their own energy needs. By becoming a major exporter of LNG, the U.S. can not only help stabilize energy prices globally, but also strengthen its geopolitical influence in regions that are heavily dependent on energy imports. The push to open up U.S. energy markets, however, is not limited to fossil fuels. The Trump administration has also voiced its commitment to renewable energy, albeit in a more limited capacity. The administration has made it clear that it supports a clean energy future, but the focus has primarily been on reducing government regulations and allowing the private sector to determine the most effective energy solutions. Trump has expressed frustration with regulations that he believes hinder the growth of the energy sector, particularly in the case of solar and wind power. While renewable energy is part of the broader energy strategy, the administration has focused much of its attention on traditional energy sources like coal, oil, and natural gas, which continue to play a significant role in the U.S. energy landscape. Beyond energy, the Trump administration's push to overhaul government regulations and reduce the size of the federal bureaucracy has also involved major changes to environmental regulations. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, under Administrator Scott Pruitt, rolled back a number of Obama-era environmental regulations, including rules on air and water pollution. The Trump administration's stance on environmental regulation has been a major point of contention, with critics arguing that the deregulation efforts endanger public health and contribute to climate change. In one notable Trump news conference, the president touted the rollback of these regulations as a way to promote economic growth and increase job opportunities, particularly in the coal and manufacturing sectors. However, environmentalists have warned that these changes could have disastrous consequences for the planet, particularly as the impacts of climate change become increasingly evident. The Trump administration's approach to energy and environmental policy is indicative of a larger shift in U.S. politics, one that prioritizes economic growth and energy dominance over environmental sustainability and climate action. While the push for energy independence and deregulation may appeal to certain segments of the population, particularly those in the energy industry, the long-term consequences of these policies are still unclear. As the U.S. continues to ramp up its energy production, the question remains whether the country can strike a balance between economic growth and environmental responsibility. In conclusion, the Trump administration's efforts to reshape the federal government and assert energy dominance have sparked significant debate and controversy. From the mass layoffs of federal employees to the rollback of environmental regulations and the push for greater energy production, these actions are reshaping the country's future. While supporters argue that these policies will strengthen the economy, create jobs, and enhance national security, critics contend that they come at the expense of public services, environmental protection, and long-term sustainability. As the U.S. moves forward with these ambitious reforms, the full impact of these changes will likely be felt for years to come. It is clear that the Trump News Conference agenda, particularly around energy and government reform, is having a profound effect on the country's direction, and only time will tell whether these decisions will lead to lasting prosperity or unintended consequences.